Before I begin, let me say this gently. Thank you for being here. If you're listening to this story from another state, another country, another quiet room somewhere far from mine, leave a comment. Tell me where you are. Means more than you know. Now, let me tell you what happened. Some houses are just structures. Walls, roof, windows. But others learn you. This one learned me slowly, patiently, the way soil learns rain. In the mornings, when the Georgia sun crept through the pecan trees and spilled itself across the hardwood floors, the house would wake with a sound so faint it wasn't really a sound at all. More like a breath. Dust motes floated in the light like tiny planets, and the beams overhead settled into their places, familiar and loyal. At night the house exhaled. The air cooled. The floorboards sighed. Everything softened. I had lived inside that rhythm for 40 years. I no longer knew where my life ended and the house began. It was built by my father-in-law, a man with quiet eyes and hands that understood permanence. He didn't build it to impress anyone. He built it to last. For grandchildren who would someday run down the hallways. For dinners that would stretch long past sunset. For a family that, at the time, I believed would protect one another. I believed many things back then. That morning I was in the kitchen making soup. Nothing fancy. Chicken broth. Dumplings rolled by hand. The kind of meal you make not to impress but to remember. Cornelius barely ate anymore. His body had been thinning since the strokes, but sometimes, just sometimes, the smell of familiar food pulled him back a little. His eyes would sharpen. His fingers would twitch. I chopped carrots slowly, carefully. Small cubes. Almost decorative. I remember teaching our son to do the same thing. He had been so small then, standing on a stool beside me, gripping a plastic knife like it was a treasure. "Mama," he used to say, puffing his chest out. "I'm a chef." We would laugh. Both of us. That laughter never really left the kitchen. It lived in the grain of the table, in the soft dents along the counter's edge. And then her voice cut through it. That again. Kessia stood in the doorway, silk robe pressed smooth against her frame, arms crossed like punctuation marks. "We talked about this yesterday," she continued. "There are thousands of recipes online. Cream soups, cold soups, something modern. This," she gestured vaguely toward the pot, "is so old-fashioned." She never called me Mom. Only Miss Idella. Polite, sharp, distant. I didn't turn around. I kept stirring. "Your husband has always liked this," I said. She scoffed softly. "Your husband doesn't know what day it is half the time. But Trevant does. And Trevant deserves better." They had been living with us for 3 years. First it made sense. Cornelius's first stroke frightened all of us. Family stays together in times like that. We gave them the second floor, the master bedroom, the balcony, the view of the garden. Cornelius and I moved downstairs so the stairs wouldn't exhaust him. It was temporary. At least that's what I thought. Gradually, the house began to change its breath. Their things appeared everywhere. Their smells, sharp perfume, expensive cologne, settled into corners where lavender and old books used to live. Their voices echoed too loudly down the halls. Last week, Kessia moved my father-in-law's armchair. She didn't ask. That chair had been there longer than I had. Its leather was cracked, softened by decades of reading, of holding grandchildren who fell asleep mid-story. She pushed it into a dark corner and replaced it with something white and angular and lifeless. "It doesn't fit the aesthetic," she said, over her shoulder. That night, when everyone was asleep, I went downstairs and touched the chair. Just once. Like greeting an old friend you don't know how to defend anymore. Cornelius was in the study when I brought him his lunch later that day. He lay staring at the ceiling, eyes distant. His body had weakened, but his mind still flickered now and then, like a coal that refused to go cold. "They're loud today," he murmured. "They are," I said, sitting beside him and taking his hand. His skin felt like paper, warm but fragile. At noon Trevant came downstairs. He didn't greet us. He sat at the table and stared at his phone. I placed the bowl of soup in front of him. He pushed it away without looking. "Mom, we need to talk." Kessia appeared instantly, sitting across from him. Her hands folded neatly. Her eyes calculating. "We've been thinking," Trevant said. "About the future. About Dad's condition. About paperwork." He still didn't look at me. To avoid complications later, it would be best if you transferred the house to me now. Just a deed. A formality. The words were casual. That's what froze me. No, I said. My voice didn't shake. This house belongs to your father and me. Kessia leaned forward. So you want your only son dealing with courts and offices later? When well, you know. I know exactly, I said. That's why the answer is no. Trevant finally looked up. There was no affection there. Only irritation. Like I was furniture blocking his path. We live here, he said. We take care of Dad. You live in my house, I corrected. And I take care of him. That's when Cornelius appeared in the doorway. He was holding himself up against the frame, breathing hard. But his eyes were clear. He looked at his son. You are a disgrace, he said. The word cracked the room open. Trevant exploded. A disgrace, he shouted. This house is mine by right. It always was. He moved toward his father. I stepped between them. Enough, I said. But he didn't listen. He grabbed my shoulder, not hard but firm. Then he seized his father's arm. This is ours now, he snarled. He dragged us down the hall toward the basement door. The smell hit us first. Cold earth. Damp stone. He shoved us inside. The door slammed. The bolt slid shut. Darkness. I sank onto the stone step, holding Cornelius as my breath came apart in my chest. Years of love. Years of sacrifice. Ending here. And then very softly, I felt his lips near my ear. Hush, he whispered. They don't know what's behind that wall. At that moment, sitting in the darkness of our own basement, I still believed we had lost everything. I didn't yet understand that what my husband was about to show me would become the most dangerous truth my son had ever underestimated. The silence after the door slammed was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that presses against your ears, thick and heavy, as if the air itself has decided to stop moving. The basement swallowed sound whole. Even my breathing felt too loud, too reckless, like something that might give us away, even though there was no one left to hear us. Cornelius trembled against me. Not from fear. From cold. From weakness. I pulled him closer, pressing his thin body to mine, trying to shield him from the damp that rose from the stone steps. The basement had always been a place of storage, never comfort. Jars once lined the shelves, peaches, beans, tomatoes, preserved for winters that no longer came the way they used to. Now there was only emptiness and the sour smell of earth. They locked us in, I whispered, though he already knew. Above us, footsteps thundered. Fast. Uneven. Kessia's lighter steps followed, sharp and impatient. The front door slammed so hard that the vibration rolled through the foundation like distant thunder. Then an engine. Then nothing. They were gone. The house stood empty above us, our house, while we sat buried alive inside it. Cornelius shifted suddenly. His grip tightened around my wrist. Help me up, he whispered. There was something different in his voice. Not panic. Not despair. Resolve. I helped him stand, though his legs shook violently beneath him. Each step down the narrow staircase felt dangerous. The wooden rail was cold, slick with age. When we reached the dirt floor, the thin strip of light leaking from beneath the basement door barely illuminated anything at all. He didn't guide me toward the shelves. He led me toward the far wall. The foundation stones were rough, uneven, darkened by decades of moisture. He leaned against them, breathing hard, eyes closed as if summoning strength he hadn't used in years. My father showed me, he said slowly. When I was 18. I didn't interrupt. He told me it was only for the worst day. Said I would know when that day came. Cornelius slid his shoulder along the wall, feeling the stones with a careful familiarity that made my skin prickle. His fingers paused. Here, he whispered. Press here. I placed my hand where he indicated. The stone felt no different from the others, cold, unyielding. I pressed harder. It shifted. Not outward. Inward. The sound it made was soft and terrible. Stone scraping against stone. A secret breaking its seal. Behind the loose block was darkness deeper than the basement itself. A hollow square carved into the wall, untouched by light or air. Inside it, something cold. Metal. My fingers closed around a small tin. Old. Light. Ordinary. We carried it back to the steps and sat side by side, shoulders touching. Cornelius took the box from my hands. His fingers fumbled with the latch, trembling badly now. Not from weakness alone, but from something else. Memory. Finally, the lid clicked open. I expected coins. Or photographs. Something sentimental. Something small. Instead, there were papers. Folded. Yellowed. Fragile. Cornelius unfolded the first one. "Read it," he said. Even in the dim light, I recognized the format immediately. The official language. The seal. The careful handwriting. A birth certificate. But the name printed there was not the name I had spoken for 40 years. I read it once. Then again. The place of birth made my stomach tighten. A prison hospital. A name I recognized only from whispered histories and old articles I'd once cataloged in the archives. "Cornelius," I breathed. "That isn't my name," he said quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. "That was the name they gave me," he continued. "To protect me." He handed me the second document. An adoption decree. Legal. Formal. Cold. The handwriting belonged to my father-in-law. The next paper was different. A letter. I recognized the script instantly. The confident slant. The careful pressure. My hands shook as I unfolded it. "My son," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone and the world has become unkind again. I never told you the truth because I feared it would steal the life I tried so hard to give you. Your father was a good man. A brilliant one. He refused to bend when bending was demanded. For that he was destroyed. I promised him his child would live free of that shadow. I gave you my name, my family, my protection. Wear it with dignity. But never forget whose blood you carry. The blood of a man who did not kneel." I lowered the letter slowly. The cold I felt then had nothing to do with the basement. It spread inward. My entire life reorganized itself in silence. All those years. All that pride. The name my son worshipped like a crown. It was never his by blood. And he had no idea. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me hardened. Cleanly, efficiently. Like ice forming in still water. I had worked in archives most of my life. I understood documents. I understood how truth survived quietly, waiting to be found. And what lay in that tin was not just truth. It was leverage. We sat there for hours. Time dissolved. Cornelius eventually rested his head against my shoulder and slept, exhausted by the release of a secret he'd carried alone for nearly 4 decades. I didn't sleep. I planned. When the bolt scraped open and the door flew wide, light stabbed my eyes. Trevant stood there, blocking the doorway, satisfaction already written across his face. "Well," he said, "have you thought about it?" His voice was sweet with false concern. "Should I call someone? A nurse maybe?" "Yes," I said, standing slowly. "He needs care. Give me your phone." He hesitated only a moment before handing it to me. He believed I had broken. He didn't watch the number I dialed. A woman answered. Calm. Crisp. I spoke evenly. Clearly. When I handed the phone back, he glanced at the screen, uninterested. "Good," he said. "A smart decision." That night, I became invisible. I cooked. Cleaned. Folded laundry. They stopped lowering their voices. They planned openly. And I listened. Because a woman they believe is finished is the most dangerous woman in the house. They thought locking me in the basement had ended the story. What they didn't realize was that it was the moment I finally understood the value of what I had been protecting, and exactly how much it could cost them. After the basement, the house grew strangely quiet. Not peaceful, controlled. The kind of quiet that feels staged. Like a room where everyone is pretending nothing happened, while watching one another from the corners of their eyes. I moved through the days with precision. I cooked. I cleaned. I medicated Cornelius. I spoke only when spoken to. They mistook restraint for surrender. That was their second mistake. They stopped lowering their voices when I entered a room. Conversations that once halted mid-sentence now continued freely, as if I were a piece of furniture, useful but irrelevant. At breakfast one morning, Kessia flipped through a magazine while I placed biscuits on the table. "You know," she said casually, "that wall between the living room and your husband's study, it isn't load-bearing. We could open the whole space up." Modernize it. My hand froze for half a second over the skillet. That wall. Langston's desk had rested against it. That was where he wrote his journals. Where Cornelius had taught our son to form letters, pencil scratching carefully on wallpaper that still bore faint height marks if you looked closely. Trevant didn't look up from his coffee. Sounds good. The study will be empty soon anyway. And the books? She asked. We could donate them. Or recycle. Recycle. I set the plate down gently. My face remained calm. Inside, something final snapped. Not loudly, not violently, but cleanly, like thread cut with sharp scissors. The boy who once fell asleep listening to his grandfather read no longer existed. That afternoon, they came to Cornelius's bedside. Their expressions were rehearsed, concern arranged like a costume. Mom, Trevant began, voice softened. We've been talking about everything you've been carrying. The house. Dad's care. It's a lot for one person. Kessia placed her hand on my shoulder. The touch was light, but it made my skin crawl. We found a place for you, she said gently. Not a nursing home. Community. Beautiful grounds. Medical staff all day. You'll have your own room. A room. In exchange for my life. They spoke as if they were granting mercy. I looked at my son's face. So familiar in structure, so foreign in expression. I searched for doubt. Shame. Something human. There was nothing. Only impatience. In that moment motherhood ended. Not in rage. Not in tears. Simply shut off. Like a clock whose spring finally breaks. That's very generous, I said quietly. I'll need time to think. Their relief was immediate. They smiled. Left the room convinced of victory. That night I packed a bag. The next morning, I told them I needed to visit a pharmacy across town. A rare medication, I said. Trevant handed me cash with the air of someone indulging a harmless request. Don't be long, Kessia added. Lunch needs to be ready. I nodded. They watched me leave like caretakers supervising a dependent. They didn't know I was going to war. The lawyer's office was calm, clean, quiet in the way serious places are. She listened without interruption as I laid everything out. The basement, the demand, the documents. When I placed the tin on her desk, she went very still. She read carefully, slowly. When she looked up, her eyes were no longer sympathetic. They were sharp. This, she said, tapping the birth certificate gently, changes everything. I told her I wanted my house back. She smiled slightly. You're going to get much more than that. When I returned home, I resumed my silence. They grew bolder. They ordered furniture catalogs, measured walls, discussed renovations over wine. I memorized every word. A week later, the phone rang. Her voice was different this time. Tight. Controlled. I need to tell you what I found, she said. And you need to understand what it means. She explained who Cornelius's biological father had been. Not just a dissident. A man erased. A name that still carried poison in certain circles. Your son's entire world. His career, his partnerships, his pride, was built on a name that could not survive the truth. This won't just hurt him, she said. It will erase him. I thanked her. Hung up. Sat in the kitchen while sunlight fell across the floor like it always had. And felt nothing. No guilt. No fear. Only clarity. They had tried to erase me first. Now they would learn what erasure really meant. They were sharp. This, she said, tapping the birth certificate gently, changes everything. I told her I wanted my house back. She smiled slightly. You're going to get much more than that. When I returned home, I resumed my silence. They grew bolder. They ordered furniture catalogs, measured walls, discussed renovations over wine. I memorized every word. A week later, the phone rang. Her voice was different this time. Tight. Controlled. I need to tell you what I found, she said. And you need to understand what it means. She explained who Cornelius's biological father had been. Not just a dissident. A man erased. A name that still carried poison in certain circles. Your son's entire world. His career, his partnerships, his pride, was built on a name that could not survive the truth. This won't just hurt him, she said. It will erase him. I thanked her. Hung up. sat in the kitchen while sunlight fell across the floor like it always had, and felt nothing. No guilt. No fear. Only clarity. They had tried to erase me first. Now they would learn what erasure really meant. When my son finally realized I was no longer afraid, he made one last move, one public, desperate gamble that would decide everything. 2 mornings later, the doorbell rang. Trevant was irritated before he even opened it. He disliked interruptions, especially unplanned ones. I stayed in the living room, sitting straight-backed in the armchair Kessia hated, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I already knew who it was. The door opened, and the temperature of the house changed. A woman stood on the threshold, dark suit, neat hair, posture sharp enough to cut glass. Beside her was a man holding a leather folder, his expression neutral and professional. "Trevant Cornelius Dubois?" the woman asked. "Yes," he replied, frowning. "Who are you?" "My name is Veda Sterling. I represent the legal interests of the homeowner." She paused, then added, "This is for you." She handed him the envelope. Trevant glanced at me, confusion flickering across his face. He took the papers, flipped them open casually, then stopped. His brow furrowed. He read again. Then he laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "Eviction," he scoffed. "This is a joke." Kessia stepped closer, snatched the pages from his hands, scanned them quickly, and smirked. "Oh, Idella," she said lightly. "We were worried you'd lost yourself, but I didn't think you'd stage something this dramatic." She turned to Veda with a patronizing smile. "I'm afraid my mother-in-law misled you. She's not well." Then, with deliberate confidence, Kessia crossed the room, opened a drawer, and produced a folder. "This," she announced, handing it over, "is the real document. The deed of gift. Signed. Notarized. The house belongs to my husband." Veda accepted it without expression. She examined the paper slowly, holding it up to the light. "Interesting," she said finally. "Especially the notary seal." The room grew very quiet. "I knew this notary," Veda continued calmly. "He passed away 2 years ago." Silence fell like a dropped plate. "That's impossible," Kessia whispered. "No," Veda replied. "What's impossible is notarization from the grave." Trevant stepped forward, face flushing. "You're threatening us in our own home?" "I'm informing you," Veda said. "Forgery is a felony." She turned to him fully now. "The house belongs to my client. This is confirmed by the original will of Langston Dubois." Trevant's mouth opened, closed. "He left everything," Veda continued, "to his daughter-in-law in gratitude for her care." For the first time, fear appeared. "This will be contested," Trevant shouted. "I am the heir." Veda nodded slowly. "You're welcome to try," she said. "But contesting the will requires proof of legal lineage." She paused. "A full and public genealogical review." Kessia swayed slightly, grabbing the back of a chair. Trevant went pale. They understood the threat, even without the details. The lawyer nodded once and left. The house felt heavier afterward. The air thick. Trevant exploded. "You planned this," he shouted at me. "You're trying to destroy us." I said nothing. They raged. Accused. Threatened. Then they cried. Kessia sobbed. Trevant knelt in front of me, pleading. "Mama," he whispered. "I did everything for our name. Our future." I looked at him and felt only pity. "The house," I said softly, "is the least of your problems." I gave them 3 days. That night, Trevant returned with a final plan. A family council. Witnesses. Partners. A public trial. I agreed that he thought public judgment would break me. What he didn't understand was that truth, once invited into the light, does not ask permission to destroy lies. The meeting was scheduled for 11 in the morning. Trevant's townhouse was everything he wanted people to see. High ceilings, pale walls, expensive furniture chosen for status rather than comfort. The kind of place that looks impressive but never feels lived in. When I arrived with Veda Sterling, the room was already full. Relatives I hadn't seen in years stood in small clusters. His uncle Peter, who liked to remind everyone of his position in city government, leaned against the window, arms crossed. His wife, Vera, sat stiffly on the couch, pearls heavy against her throat. Near the far wall stood 3 of Trevant's business partners, Men with careful eyes and practiced smiles. Kessia moved through the room pouring water, playing the gracious hostess. Trevant stood at the center, posture solid, expression sorrowful. He looked every inch the devoted son. When we entered, conversation stopped. Every eye turned to me. I felt no fear. I felt prepared. Trevant began speaking before anyone else could. He talked about concern, about love, about how hard it was to watch a parent slip away. He spoke gently of my confusion, of my vulnerability. He never raised his voice, never accused directly. He didn't need to. He painted himself as the protector, me as the fragile problem. When he finished, there were nods, murmurs of sympathy. Then Veda stood. She didn't rush. She didn't argue. She placed 2 documents on the table. One is a deed, she said calmly. The other is proof it's forged. The room shifted. She explained. Dates. Signatures. The notary's death. The smiles disappeared. Trevant tried to interrupt. His voice cracked halfway through his sentence. These are lies. These are facts, Veda replied. Then she turned to me. Mrs. Du Bois? I stood. I didn't look at my son. I looked at the room. I devoted my life to this family, I said. I preserved its history, its truth. Legacy is not property. It is memory and honesty. I placed Langston's letter on the table. This is the real inheritance. Silence filled the room. Uncle Peter read the letter. His face hardened. One by one, people stood and left. No arguments. No explanations. Trevant was left standing alone. Kessia clutched his arm, eyes wide with disbelief. I walked out without looking back. Cornelius passed away quietly 2 months later. We talked about the garden, about our first date, about nothing that hurt. He died holding my hand. Trevant did not come to the funeral. I buried Cornelius beside his adopted father. 2 men bound by choice, not blood. 6 months passed. The house grew quiet again, but this time it healed. I renovated the basement. White walls, warm light, shelves filled with documents, photographs, letters. My archive. I placed a photograph on the first page of a new album. A young woman at a desk, eyes bright, surrounded by books. Me. I smiled. For the first time in decades, my life was my own. I was no longer someone's caretaker, someone's sacrifice. I was simply a woman standing in her own house, looking out at her own garden. And I was free. Where does forgiveness end and self-respect begin? Did I go too far? Or not far enough? Tell me what you think. And tell me where you're listening from. Thank you for staying with me.